So I want to say welcome to everybody attending our first hybrid meeting of Repair. Actually, I'm going to remove my mask as I speak to you. I'm Carl Weber, a member of the organizing committee of Repair. And this is the first time since COVID that we are gathering in person. We are masking here and trying to take all the necessary precautions. But we're hoping that this can become a regular practice going forward, that we'll be able to gather here in person and have the fellowship that's possible when you gather together with coffee and donuts. And in addition, have the advantage of inviting people like you to join us via Zoom, which we think during the last couple of years, a lot of people kind of got used to that, kind of like the idea of not having to drive out on a school night. So we're hoping we can serve the best of both worlds, attract both people here in person and those of you who join us by Zoom. And we're going to do our best to involve everyone, including those of you who are joining by Zoom. Janice Landrum here in the room with us from our organizing committee is going to be monitoring the chat, and we're going to invite you to participate as fully as you can. She's going to try to make sure that you're involved and communicate with her through chat if you're having any difficulty hearing or participating in any way. So again, welcome to Repair, and let me make our usual opening remarks. Whoops. There we go. Repair, for those who are new to Repair, is a faith-based organization whose mission is to work for healing and justice. We seek opportunities for active engagement to address racial and economic injustice, both on our own and in partnership with other organizations in our communities. We support our work through education and dialogue in an atmosphere of mutual respect. And speaking of mutual respect, Repair respectfully acknowledges the ancestral homes of the Lenape and other related tribes in the River Towns region, from Dobbs Ferry to Peekskill and beyond. We recognize their ongoing cultural and spiritual connection to this land, past, present, and future. Our group norms, which we always strive to honor in every meeting of Repair: listen to understand, not to convince. Speak from your own experience. You'll all, including those of you attending on Zoom, will have an opportunity to share, ask questions, and make comments during the evening. When you do, we urge you to speak from your own experience rather than feeling that you need to represent a group. You are who you are, and we value you for that. Share the stage. Give others a chance to share as well. Lean into discomfort if something that you hear this evening makes you feel a little nervous or a little defensive. Maybe that means it's an important message to hear. Repair is a place where we try to engage issues of that kind. Participate to the fullest of your ability. Do honor confidentiality. We urge people to take away the important lessons that come out of a meeting of Repair. But if someone shares a deeply personal story, that's best to leave in this room. Ask say it. A few rules of the road for this evening on Zoom. If you have a question or comment, a Repair leader will be watching the chat window on Zoom, so please write your questions or comments there. Your microphone will be muted until a moderator calls on you. That's to reduce background noise. We recommend setting your Zoom page to speaker view to better follow the discussion. And we are recording this evening's discussion so we can later post it on the Repair YouTube channel. And I'd like to ask Gareth. Gareth, would you please come to the microphone to offer our opening prayer?
Thank you so much, Carl. Let us pray. God of all nations and peoples, open our hearts and minds to the movement of your Spirit in this meeting, that we may comprehend more clearly how the intertwined realities of climate change and racism undermine your desire for human flourishing and greatly hinder the well-being of your people in places where environmental racism is already felt and experienced. We ask this in your gracious name, and so we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much, Gareth.
I do see there are a couple of people trying to get in who are having technical difficulties, but I don't think it's on our.
Trying to get into the room, you mean?
Yeah, I keep admitting them and they can't get in.
Oh, that's curious. Okay. Well,
So
yeah, keep trying. I'm very honored to introduce our special guest for this evening. Raya Salter is an attorney with a special dedication to issues of climate change, and particularly as they affect people of color and other disadvantaged communities. She's going to speak a little bit more about her own background. So I'm going to let her tell that story. She'll do a better job than I could. And before I bring her up, I'm going to do one thing, Raya, which is call up. I know you have some slides that you're going to want to share with us. So I'm going to call those up, and actually, you know what I'm going to do? Just click here where it says share when you're ready to share. For now, Raya, please come up, introduce yourself, and when you're ready to share, click that button.
All right, thank you so much.
I'm here to help us.
Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and hello everyone on Zoom. So lovely to see you.
And
Where?
Ryan, that's your camera.
All right, it seems all right. I'm looking at the folks in the room and also to the folks on Zoom. I'll go ahead. Well, maybe before I hit share, I just wanted to say thank you so very much for having me to come speak. Also, I think I've been to a lot of meetings, and I don't think anything beats the incredible cider donuts and cider that I was served here. As we're entering into, I was saying, really the glory. We have like a few weeks of true glory in our region with the autumn. So thank you for the refreshments. Thank you for having me. Thank you for that opening prayer. I truly appreciated it. I have never heard a prayer like that, you know, and it is so needed, and just to me was so welcome to hear, because the climate crisis, which existentially we all face, really inequality and injustice is truly at the heart of the climate crisis. And that means acknowledging the role of racism, you know, with a big R, and environmental racism with a big R in particular. So I wanted to say thank you so much for that. And thank you for everyone on Zoom. So I'll walk you through a little bit of my, let me see, am I sharing?
That's working.
We've got it going here, but I guess I should be in present mode.
If you look on the monitor on the side, Ryan,
That's what folks are seeing. All right, so let me see though, because I want to be able to go into presentation mode, but you know how the bar sometimes prevents what?
Right. I don't think you can do that.
Oh, okay, maybe just full screen. Or
Well,
maybe it's a PDF and that's the issue.
It's PDFs. Oh, this is good. There. So,
Excellent.
now make sure you can go up and down to your slides.
I know, right? Which way is up and which way? Sometimes it's space bar. I don't know how one
I'll
goes
try that.
backwards, however.
It would be space for
I know, right? I know you. Sorry, bear with us as I I'm sure there's a way. How do we even, maybe I need to go.
Well, what I'm going to do, I think, is Peter, can you save us?
Maybe.
This is, these are the.
Maybe I can just have it be in that other way if that's easier.
Okay, and then
That's.
so then this doesn't work.
Oh, which button
Okay.
did you choose?
Arrows up and
See,
down.
it says touch.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you so much. And in these moments, for the folks who are desperately trying, you know, who are joining and getting kicked off, and in these moments in our Zoom world, it's so we just really have to breathe. Some of, I think, my biggest frustrations have been like, I can't get into the Zoom. I can't get my Zoom's not working. So we'll just breathe. So yes, my name is Raya Salter, and I thought, really, Even though, as we know, that the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has told us as recently as this year, is that the climate crisis is real, it's dire, it's impacting us already, and we literally have, this is the most decisive decade in human history. We have 10 years to act on the climate crisis, and that does mean doing difficult work about understanding inequality, yet we are at a transformational moment. We're at a transformational time, and there's never been a more robust time to step into climate action. And environmental justice, action on environmental justice, as much as we do our regional and our federal and our international advocacy, is all about the grassroots work that we do with each other. It's all about building those interpersonal relationships and organizing in authentic ways with each other. And so we couldn't be at a more impactful and dynamic time to be learning about this and to be taking action on this together. And because of that, I wanted to go ahead and focus in my presentation about some of the things that are happening in New York State. In particular, our climate law from 2019. Folks may or may not be familiar with the CLCPA. That's okay, I'm going to talk about it tonight. What it says about climate and environmental justice, what action on the ground in New York State by activists has done that has literally resounded across the nation and in some ways across the world. And I'm not overselling it. And what that means for climate and environmental justice from an economic, funding perspective at the state and federal level, because there's a lot of it, it's happening right now. So, okay, who am I? I am Raya Salter. I am the founder and executive director of a new organization called the Energy Justice Law and Policy Center, which, believe it or not, is the country's first public interest law firm solely dedicated to energy justice. I am also, it's funny, I'm trying, if folks in the room, okay, I'm trying to look at this camera. It feels a little awkward to be looking here when you're all like sitting right there. It's all right, but I'll continue to do that. So yes, I'm an attorney who focuses on energy and climate justice, but I was trained as an energy attorney. I worked for the law firm of Dewey and LaBeouf in New York City after law school. I've been an attorney for both the Environmental Defense Fund and the Natural Resources Defense Council, where I did clean energy advocacy. I spent 3 years actually living and working in Hawaii on issues of energy justice. I actually was back there for the first time in the pandemic. This morning, or morning to me, I was on a beach in Kaneohe, but I am back. It's wonderful to be able to be in Hawaii, but also connecting with the energy advocates and energy equity advocates there. And then more recently, I came back to New York and I joined up with a rowdy group of of hooligans called the New York Renews Climate Justice Coalition, where I served as their policy organizer. And just when I came back is when, this is the group that was behind the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that was passed into law. Pursuant to that law, we have a very dynamic climate agenda in New York State. I'm going to talk more about it. I was named by our Senate Majority Leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins. I'm sure she's our regional person. Folks, I'm sure know her very well or know of her, to our State Climate Action Council. And so I'm doing a lot of work in that area. I also do federal advocacy. One interesting thing that's a bit of news is that I've been selected to join the Movement for Black Lives delegation to the UN climate talks in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. So I'll be going to Egypt for the COP with the Movement for Black Lives. And this is the first time that the Movement for Black Lives, as we know, the Black Lives Matter movement has developed a climate mandate and will be taking a robust delegation to the COP, which I think is a really exciting and new thing. So I'm up to a lot of things. There are a lot of things to be up to. I talked about EJLPC and something that I figured I'd mention because I was the subject of viral fame just a few weeks ago. And I figured that I'd mention it because it's also on topic. And it's something that actually I encourage everyone. A very good way to get and stay in touch with me is to find me on, I'll give you my email, and phone number. But to find me on Instagram, I am Climate Auntie on Instagram. I love in particular to mentor young people. It's part of my Climate Auntie, thing. And so I also encourage everyone who's listening, who's on Zoom, you have a Climate Auntie. You can call me Climate Auntie. You can call yourself a Climate Auntie, and think of us as climate family. But what happened, and I can share a link to the videos because they really speak to themselves. And if I'd really gotten it together, I would have gone to YouTube and just shown, because it's only a 1-minute video clip. But what happened is that I was called to testify before the House Oversight Committee for the big oil hearing that was focused on environmental injustice, big oil false pledges and misinformation. I've testified before the Oversight Committee before, and you expect, representatives are there to get their moment and to get their sound bites, and so you expect to get some oddball things. What I didn't expect is that, here I am testifying about environmental justice and big oil. And one of those major issues is petrochemicals. Have folks heard of Cancer Alley? Many folks, some, I'm seeing a lot of nods. If you haven't, it's not actually an alley. It's it's an 85-mile stretch of Louisiana along a certain population center, really the main population centers of Louisiana, where there are more than 150 petrochemical processing facilities. This is where oil is refined and processed to make plastics. There's a lot to say about that, but it's an extremely intense, polluting process that for many years has caused an intergenerational poisoning of the residents along this area, just entire generations, multiple generations dying prematurely, horrible deaths due to cancer. Predominantly, the Black and brown and poor residents of Louisiana. It's one of the most sort of textbook issues of environmental injustice in the entire country. And so here comes the Republican, and I don't like to be political, this just happens to have been Congress. So I kind of not be, some things, we got some stuff going on, but I don't like to be partisan, but this happened to be, it's unfortunate that the climate's a partisan issue, and it's actually something I deeply care about, is to think about how we can not make it a partisan issue. But in this instance, the representative from Louisiana, and they're talking about environmental injustice, and he, who considers himself a warrior for the petrochemical industry, decided he was going to give me a barrage of very disrespectful questions, calling himself an environmentalist. How could I live in society, don't we need petrochemicals? And decided to be very disrespectful while he was doing it, interrupting me, calling me boo at one point, which is very disrespectful when you're in Congress, calling me young lady. I like to, I actually had my 50th birthday this past week, and I am young. But to call someone young lady is like clearly, just like trying to demean them while they're speaking. And I feel I got the better of him in the exchange. I called him out. I actually, since we're in a church, he went on this tirade about how, he's an environmentalist because God gave man dominion over the earth and the creatures, and so thus he loves the earth, and do I. And I literally just said to him, if we're going to talk about the Lord, I ask that you search your heart and think about repenting, because the fossil fuel industry that owns your state is destroying the earth and the natural world. And you need to think about what you are not doing or doing to your own constituents who are dying of cancer in Louisiana. So anyway, got a lot of coverage and went viral. I was on The View, but I also was, for his tirade, Representative Higgins was invited on to Tucker Carlson, no less. And so I have the maybe honor of having an entire Tucker Carlson segment devoted to how I am a moron and other things. And I bring it up because, and then I got a lot of nasty messages from the hordes, Of course, it was a very slanted presentation, but it's interesting how not only was I called un-American in that segment, which is scary, but it really was very focused on, it was very misogynist, I'm a moron. And the messages I got, you know, which I won't use the expletives, but they all focused on definitely the B word, my hair, calling me stupid, a waste of life, that, you know, I wasn't able to think or have a job, you know, like just these very sort of racialized, misogynistic comments that are really kind of the playbook of really just trying to really just bully anyone who's different, to create that sense of, you know, we're over here and they're over there. And isn't it fun and funny to kind of like pick at the unhinged liberal commie person? And it was nasty. And I just bring it up because this is what, because of this partisanship, like this is really real. And we just need to be aware of these things and support each other. I can follow up. There's, I tried to keep the onus on the issues, and I got AOC to retweet. Actually, she was there. The reason it blew up is because she was there, and she called out Representative Higgins for his misogyny, and then a boosh went after that. But she retweeted a thread I made about petrochemicals, you know, to talk about petrochemicals. And so I can share the link to that. If you can retweet my petrochemicals and take a look at that. So I just wanted to share that story because it happened a couple of weeks ago, and it's not off topic. All right, so back to what we're here to talk about, New York State and the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act of 2019. It is by far and away one of the country's most ambitious climate laws, and it is by far the state climate law that has the most robust energy, climate, and environmental justice provisions. Wait, did I? Yes. So actually what I like to do a little bit is, and I'll talk about it in the federal context, but I like to folks to see this picture. We may even have folks here who were either at the 2015 climate march or were at the CLCPA action in 2019. Often when I talk to New York audiences, there are folks who were there. And if you were, thanks for your support. But I just want to use this to emphasize this again, like this, you know, I was at that action as a volunteer legal observer. You know, when there are opportunities to come together in community and do action and do direct action, because that's what we were doing there. We were looking to get arrested to say we need climate action. It's a funny story. We actually didn't end up getting arrested, which I was excited about because I was the only legal support who was there. And all of the activists showed up with literally with like my cell phone number written on their arms, which is fantastic. I had told folks, I'm like, wait, I've got the person who's going to come to the courthouse with you on the line. That's actually not me. I'm an energy lawyer. So it was very nerve-wracking. But what ended up happening, all laying down in front of Cuomo's office, and we're climate action. And the cops came up and they said, we don't have the capacity to arrest all of you today. We just don't. We just can't arrest you. Like, can we just do something about this? And here we are, like, we came to get arrested. No. And they said, you know what? If we arrest you, we're going to keep all of you overnight. And we were like, that doesn't sound so great, because we just brought box lunch sandwiches. So we ended up agreeing not to, you know, to get hauled off. And as climate activists are very polite, we picked up all our napkins and we got on our buses and we went home. But the message was loud and clear through really action of unpaid, low-paid activists. We got this climate law that was powered through, and it's reverberated across the country. So what are some of the things that the climate law says? So it really tries to put an environmental and climate justice frame on all climate action in New York State. It requires that state actions don't disproportionately burden disadvantaged communities, and I'll talk more about what disadvantaged communities means and where that comes from. It requires that emissions and co-pollutant reductions are prioritized in disadvantaged communities. For folks who may or may not know a lot about environmental justice, one of the key issues is how emissions, pollution, and co-pollutants affect environmental health. And it's actually something in Westchester County that's very important for all of us. People are surprised to hear that the American Lung Association has given Westchester a D for air quality. And it shouldn't surprise anyone that it's because we've got all these highways, right? We're like situated in between all these highways. And so while some have it worse than others, these pollution impacts really affect all of us very much. But we need to make sure if we're taking climate action, right? We're not just saying, okay, climate action over here and not climate action where folks are suffering the most. It creates a community air quality program, air monitoring program. It's actually very sophisticated and has gotten underway in New York State and several areas, including in southern Westchester. There are these very sophisticated cars that drive around and they can sense all these pollutants, and they're going to be doing New Rochelle, Mount Vernon, definitely parts of Westchester are part of that pilot program. So what else did it do? It created a climate action council to create the scoping plan that's actually due at the end of this year. We've gone through this entire process. We had the draft plan, it's been under public comment. Now is the final scoping plan that's been informed by advisory panels. I'm a member of that. I'll mention again for context, I'm the only woman of color who's on this 22-member council. Before Rory Christian joined, I was the only Black person, identified Black person. So it's just, these things are, in the background, and because we're talking about race, I figured I would mention that. It also, very importantly, it created a climate justice working group made up of climate and environmental justice advocates to determine who is a disadvantaged community. Okay, so getting back to that, what does it mean to be a disadvantaged community, and why is that important? So one of the major provisions of the 2019 climate law was that a goal of 40% and no less than 35% of all state climate spending must benefit disadvantaged communities. So this is not about a carve out, for particular people who are, saying that we deserve something. Really, it's a climate justice investment, looking at where are the communities that are most vulnerable to climate change, why, and how can we, who are the least responsible for causing the climate crisis, and how do we, and have faced historical disinvestment and lack of investment. How can we make sure that we change the status quo and require that we actually get investment in communities who've been historically underinvested in, and change this trajectory of, and be able to have some movement on climate preparedness and environmental remediation. That's really what that's about. And what happened is that Ali Zaidi, who is now President Biden's climate czar, replaced Gina McCarthy. He was in New York State at that time. He spent a brief moment of time on our second floor for Governor Cuomo as the energy person. He ended up going to the feds, and between him and others, the Biden administration caught on to this idea. Hey, there's a state that's decided that 40% of the benefits should go to disadvantaged communities. I'm under a lot of pressure to deliver on racial justice and environmental justice. Let's do that. And that's exactly what happened. So that's why what happened here, which started off, that's why I love to show this slide. That's Giovira Hernandez sitting in the middle, who I went on to work with at New Yorker News. But at that time, we were just, literally on the street demanding climate, jobs, and justice. And look how that really kind of bounced around the entire nation. This is what we did in New York State. So that is where this climate justice working group comes into play, because it's who decides who's a disadvantaged community on both the federal and the state levels. And what the heck does that mean? It's a lot. Oh, I had a slide about that. So who is a disadvantaged community? So in New York State, climate and environmental justice advocates themselves are deciding who is a disadvantaged community. The advocates worked with state analysts and released criteria for that this spring, and it's also been under public comment. I believe the public comment period is over, but what I will share a bit later, they have a mapping tool. You can click on the map, and it will show you who the states designated to be a disadvantaged community. It's not perfect. It is not perfect, but they developed many indicators. Importantly, race is a factor. Land use and facilities associated with historical discrimination, pollution exposure, climate change risk, and race is looked at in terms of, who is a disadvantaged community, and what the maps have sort of broken down criteria by climate vulnerability and environmental burden. And so you can very much click, and you can click wherever you may live. If you can click and you'll see your indicators. Just because an area may not be a disadvantaged community doesn't mean that there aren't risks. So it will show if there is if there's heavy industrial sites, what your air quality is like. Other things like, do you have adequate healthcare in your region? And are there sites that need remediation? Are you close to water? They're imperfect, these maps, but this is how they came. This is how they came up. On the federal level, the Justice 40, they call it the Justice 40. The initiative was started as an executive order. And the idea is that, we were having some trouble passing laws. So this will be an executive order, and it directed one agency to create a mapping tool on who's a disadvantaged community. Race is not a factor. This has been very controversial. Advocates are really upset about it. As a lawyer, I understand why, because I'm sorry to, I don't like to talk about the political part, but we've got a very right-leaning Supreme Court. And so there's, I understand why, there were challenges, yet you can understand, again, we're talking about racism with a big R. I didn't go into the definition of environmental justice. I teach that, I'm happy to do that. Oh, I'm an adjunct at Cardozo Law School. I love teaching that, but it is about environmental racism, it really is. But race is not a factor in the federal tool. There are a lot of tools on the federal level. Not sure which tool is going to be dominant. It's very different how it's playing out on the federal level. But I wanted to go ahead and give folks an example, in our area. I'm from New Rochelle, so I picked a slide here, but you can use this tool to look at whatever area you like in the country, including your own. So this is the state tool, and you see, and it's interesting, I bet folks know folks in New Rochelle, right? Does that look kind of weird? Like it's the entire south half of New Rochelle. And if you know New Rochelle, and sorry if you can't see that, I hope this is New Rochelle, Mount Vernon, and then Yonkers on the other side with the heavy designation. They're down there, there's Sans Suu Kyi, there's some multi-million-dollar homes, down there that are encompassed, in this area. So you can, the maps are imperfect, but you can imagine when you think about it, how important it is, this designation, because if folks,
So the purple represents
Yes.
disadvantaged communities.
the state designation of a disadvantaged community. I actually live here on the border. I don't live inside that purple zone in New Rochelle. I live just north of it. But you can imagine, look, there's a lot of climate spending happening, so it's like 40%, there's still 60, right? But this is an effort to sort of really make sure that folks who've never got this type of funding before actually get it. And you can, even if you look at the micro level, look, if I had a coastal, $1 million management property in Sans Suu Kyi, and I saw that I could get money based on this designation, I sure as heck would be applying for it, or maybe I wouldn't, but so just, you can, when you think locally, you can think about the myriad of issues. A lot of us are going to have to really work towards climate preparedness and environment, and remediation, because we live in, it rains, we all are dealing with these issues in our own homes. So anyway, this is the state designation. This is New Rochelle. This is the federal mapping tool. And so you see, though, interestingly, the federal mapping tool, and this is just this little area, it's just an eyeball so that you can see how different, right? We've got federal funds, we've got state funds, and there's a lot of difference. And this is just a hyper-local example. Why does it matter? It matters a lot, because what happened this summer They passed a little bill called the Inflation Reduction Act that includes, and this is a slide, I think this was the Washington Post, but you see how much everyone's got their different calculation, but they're saying 385 billion with a B. That's a huge amount of money, right? $1 billion for energy and climate, which a lot of that, the vast majority of that is in tax breaks, but not all of it. There's specific funds for a green bank. There are funds for environmental justice organizations. It won't surprise you, it's 40% of these funds is not going to disadvantaged communities. That is not how the federal Justice 40 is playing out. I can speak more to how and why, but that's not how this is breaking out in any way, shape, or form. But it's huge. And there are tremendous, tremendous questions on, okay, it's the biggest investment in climate in United States history. It represents a massive opportunity. Yet you can imagine the majority of it going to tax breaks, a lot of it to sort of double down on things we like. Rooftop solar, for folks, geothermal, heat pumps, making it affordable for all of us to do these things. But we know that those type of projects tend to benefit wealthier people more. You own and control your own home. And we want to see everyone moving away from, fossil gas in particular in our area. But you can imagine what some of the broader equity implications could be, even though there's so much money. Who will the disadvantaged communities be? And it also, though, has profound impacts for our energy systems, because who will be leaving the grid? Who will stay on? What will it cost? What will reliability be? However, I don't want, while someone like myself as a lawyer, I spend all my time thinking about what's wrong, what's going to be wrong, and being concerned about that. There's a lot of upside. So this is a slide from a few weeks ago from the Climate Action Council. And I'm sorry, folks, it's a busy slide. The folks in the room can't even really see, but really all that it is that the point I'm trying to make is that New York State has, because we're out ahead, has begun to do the analysis in terms of what is this federal IRA, because we figured out we need money, to implement this whole program. They're starting to estimate that we're talking $70 billion of incentives and benefits from this federal law in New York through 2050. That is a lot. It's actually going to go a long way towards getting us towards our climate goals. So there's a lot I could talk about why people are angry about the IRA. There's things that Manchin put into it that are highly problematic, yet it does offer this massive upside. In New York State, we've done the analysis. We know that climate action will save us billions of dollars as opposed to inaction. We know that if you've got gas, we've seen a $300 increase in our bill just in the months because of tremendous volatility the gas prices are having here and around the world because of factors we cannot control, because the status quo is not okay. And I think haven't been okay. I'm almost done here. So lots of questions and priorities. What kinds of projects will be done? And will they actually benefit the frontline communities that they're supposed to benefit? Who will be at the table as these decisions are made? That is the biggest question that myself as an advocate and activist in New Rochelle and all the activists and advocates throughout the country are asking. What is the vehicle for us to actually have a say on how all communities, and in particular disadvantaged communities? In New Rochelle, we had a climate emergency declaration. I helped author some language about having a climate justice task force, that's looking to have true community representation. It has not been implemented yet. Is the allocation fair for the IRA? No, we just talked about how it absolutely is not. It is giving benefits in a way that disproportionately benefit wealthier people, but there's a lot of good things in it. And so, again, I like to say, and actually, I am a Representative Bowman is my rep, and he's been great on a lot of issues. And I've kind of started putting the pressure on because, okay, we did not get a Green New Deal that looks like what we want it to look like. Oh, we still want it? Yes, we want billions of dollars for what? Clean transportation, right? We want to have clean public transportation, you know, green infrastructure. A lot of this bill does not focus on that. But look at the money, 70 billion. All this money is filtering through, and here we are in the pole position. We've got our law that's bending towards justice, and we need this Green New Deal. Like, there's going to be billions of dollars, you know, say where I'm at, you know, Jamal Bowman's district, from Scarsdale to New Rochelle to Yonkers to Mount Vernon to the Bronx. This money is not specifically for schools, it's not, but can we be creative and figure out how we can make this stuff happen? And can we make sure that people who haven't traditionally gotten this money get some dominion over this money? And can we work together to have, basically, no matter what happens with any of this money or money going forward, more community and organizing around having a say in how some of these local spending decisions are made, so that we can be a part of the transformation we want to see, as opposed to the status quo. And I think we've all been involved in, you know, local politics enough to know some of the things that happen. So that is my presentation. It was a little longer than I meant to be. I encourage folks, there's my website, and please follow Climate Auntie. And I will turn the mic back to our moderator.
I have one question. How about the areas that flood and frequently?
Janice, why don't you should come up and use the microphone. I'm just going to say, before Janice asks her question, that we do want to open the floor to questions, both from our remote virtual visitors as well as from the people here in the room. Janice, why don't you start with your question, and
Sure.
let's use the rest of our time for a dialogue with someone who clearly is deeply knowledgeable about what's going on in this area, and we can, I think, let's pick her brains while she's here, because she's an amazing resource. Go
And
ahead.
happily, I only live half an hour away.
That's right, I'm passionate. I used to work over in Mamaroneck, and I'm very familiar with the flooding, and the areas that flooded were predominantly poor, but near very rich areas as well. Is there any mechanism or money or attention toward those people who get flooded year after year after year?
I mean, I think the answer is yes. You know, in terms of, again, it's not the IRA, all those billions. It is not it is not the Green New Deal we may have wanted, right? With a huge focus on climate resilience, you know, adaptation. However, there are funds for that. And again, we're talking the 40%, there's still 60%.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes, although, you know, that's not its primary focus. My bracelet's breaking, sadly.
I have a question, Raya. You mentioned a couple of specific examples of the kinds of things that funding could go for. You mentioned green transportation, you mentioned tax breaks for solar roofs. What are some other examples of very specific concrete projects that we should be spending money on in disadvantaged communities in particular, but all over, that would really make a difference in the coming years in terms of getting a grip on the climate?
No, that's an excellent question. And actually, I'm not saying there's no money for green transportation, but that is not the focus. I was saying that one of the critiques has been that there isn't enough for some of the stuff that, like, us greenies really like the most. However, one of the things that there's a lot of money for is infrastructure, things like, and for one example, both from the IRA, but also the bipartisan infrastructure law. For example, the city of Mount Vernon, between the state and the feds, has actually been looking at more than $100 million in investment in the Mount Vernon water infrastructure, which, as folks may not know, Mount Vernon, also New Rochelle, has been under consent decree from the Justice Department for many years for underinvestment in the water infrastructure. So a lot of people, particularly in Mount Vernon, deal with sewage backups, can't drink the water. Every time it rains, they have actual sewage coming into the home. And so that is one example of really significant remediation that could happen. New Rochelle could really use to see that as well.
Okay, that's a great example. Any others? Because one of the reason I'm asking is that your talk very wisely and very appropriately focused on the legal mechanisms that are being set up to funnel some money, make some money available for needs that have gone unmet for so long. But one of the things that I, just as an average citizen, would love to have to sort of sink my teeth into and to share with my friends is more information about some of the specific things in our neighborhood that we could see being better. You know, as a result, I don't know whether that involves parklands or whether it involves things that will prevent or minimize the effects of flooding. Maybe are there things like that that we should be
Yeah,
looking at?
and actually, again, it is really, in terms of, like you said, rightly, you know, legal mechanisms to make funding available. It is an unprecedented time on the federal level in New York State. Something else I should have want to mention that I hadn't mentioned yet is the Environmental Bond Act, the New York State Environmental Bond Act. So on the ballot this year, the whole thing is flip the ballot over, because I think the language is on the other side. But there's a multi-billion-dollar, it was $4+ billion bond act that would do exactly what you're talking about in terms of wetland preservation, you know, stormwater, addressing stormwater and how, you know, wetlands can absorb that. So, I mean, in addition to federal, it's a lot of money, billions and billions, is contained in the Bond Act. The Bond Act also contains this 40%, you know, disadvantaged communities because of the CLCPA. So that's something that I encourage folks to tell others about and support, flip the ballot over and vote yes on the Bond Act. So yes, that's true. Yeah. What your question goes at the heart of what I think the environmental justice advocates and also the broader environment, well, no, let's talk about the climate environmental justice advocates are trying to get at. Because, you know, any of the state, you know, like I know, say in New Rochelle, we've had a green New Rochelle plan, you know, that is actually just getting updated. You know, Mount Vernon has a plan. Every city and town, you know, if you tap in, there's a plan. There's been some level of analysis in what needs to happen. A lot of these green plans that were in vogue that were happening 10 years ago went unfunded. Plans end up on shelves. So there are activities that folks have looked into. But that's exactly what, when we talk about what is a climate justice task force, what does a community engagement look like? Because when Jamal Bowman called me from the, you know, looking, you know, because we had earmarks from the bipartisan, well, it was earmarks before the bipartisan infrastructure law. He's like, I need to know, what are the big infrastructure projects that we need around here? And I'm like, look, I'm an attorney and I love you, Jamal, but it takes, to even apply for those funds, it can there are thresholds of 100, 200, even up to millions of dollars. You need to do structural engineering studies. You need to do, you know, so there is, and that is what there's money in the federal bill, a lot of it that is supposed to be for environmental justice organizations to do some of just what we're talking about. How do we come together to figure out what do our communities need? A lot of that's going to be empowering our municipalities, but how do we, you know, are able to weigh in? And that's the question. That is exactly it.
Okay, very interesting. Janice, you're watching our chat.
I think everybody's just listening eagerly. I don't have questions.
Yeah, I would say to folks who are joining us remotely, Janice, I'm thinking maybe we could simply invite people to raise their hand. There is a raise your hand symbol on Zoom that you can use if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, because you're certainly invited to join in this conversation. I'm imagining that some of the things you've heard tonight must be provoking some questions or ideas or thoughts that you might have. Gareth, you want to come up and use the microphone here so that everyone will be able to hear you?
What piqued my interest was when you referenced air quality, which affects all of us. And Eric Garner and George Floyd's cry, you know, I can't breathe, and how that became a real galvanizing moment for all of us in terms of tapping into compassion and sort of horror at that's racism getting played out, before our very eyes. But with something like air quality, this whole notion that racism is linked to the quality of the air that we breathe, that's a much more ineffable and not tangible form of racism. And I'm wondering how this bill will help all of us to be able to say, I can't, the quality of the air that I'm breathing isn't what it should be, and then how action can be taken to raise the alarm, particularly for communities of color that have, a built-in disadvantage.
No, that is a very important and interesting question. And yes, it won't surprise that, like the movement for Black Lives Climate mandate, the idea of I can't breathe is part of that. So we know there was a study last year that people of color, but Black people in particular, are more likely to be exposed from pollution, toxic pollution from every single source. And so, yes, we know that, for example, in the Bronx, which is famous for having some of the most highest incidence of, they call it an asthma cluster in the entire country, because of the multiple, and it's exhausting when you start listing off the highways that run through there, the trucks that come through there, the diesel fuel oil that the building is burning, the lead paint that's inside the building, the vermin and mold and other pests that might be in the building, the lack of healthy food in the area, living above a restaurant, being co-located to waste burning facilities, industrial facilities, the list goes, it's so exhausting how long the list goes. And so that's the idea really of the sacrifice zone. Who is being sacrificed so that in this instance, Manhattan can have, the energy, the fresh food markets. Imagine not having access to fresh food and literally being next to one of the country's biggest fresh food markets. And I feel very strongly, and that's why I encourage people to look at the maps, because the racism works in many different ways. So, and it's hard to connect the dots. So we know that that's true, right? And even in St. Rochelle, we know that's true. That's a sacrifice zone. The Bronx is so bad. But guess what? It's a red herring, because what's the right way? The phrase is not red herring, but what it does also is the otherizing distracts us from seeing that, wait a minute, when I look on here and I'm clicking, I'm so busy thinking that I must have clean, fresh air and I don't have the bad schools and bad air and all the stuff that they have there. Guess what? We do, but not in that concentration. And so the otherizing based on race really does prevent us from, I guess, seeing the truth about the environmental and other harms that really impact us all. And so to your point, it's just something where we need to, that's why, like, folks, look at the map. You can look at the map and you can look at what these risks are and these factors. You may find some things really surprising and interesting, and just getting educated about these things is really a first step.
Yeah, where do we access those maps?
I can, it's just, I can send the mapping tool as a link.
Okay.
It's an easy zip code. It's not the best.
We usually, after our meetings, follow up with an email to all of the folks on our mailing list with links and information sources that they can turn to learn more about the subject. So let us have that information. We'll make sure everyone who supports repair gets access to it.
It's
I have a question from this. I'm not sure how we're going to hear it though, because I've had everything's muted. Otherwise there was going to be feedback.
Right. Can you come up to the microphone, Janice, and read it for us?
Or I can.
She raised her hand.
Who is the?
I guess Barbara.
Can we unmute her?
Put it in the chat.
Oh, she can unmute herself.
I don't think she's muted, actually. Yeah, Barbara
They
Mahoney.
can go ahead and unmute.
Can you hear me?
No,
Have her-
see, my laptop is muted.
Okay, I'll write it in the chat.
She doesn't say that it's muted, but I can't hear her. But I can't
Yeah,
hear
go
her.
ahead, Barbara. We should be able to hear you.
Thank you for an interesting
Our volume's
presentation.
down. Sorry.
Start again, Barbara. Sorry.
Thank you for an interesting presentation. My question is, what can we do personally to support your work and this effort?
Well, thank you so very much for asking that question. If my work in particular, you can please follow Climate Auntie on Instagram. Check out my organization, ejlpc.org. You can subscribe through there to my email list. No, really. If you wanted to make a donation to me, you certainly could. Really, there are many organizations and folks to tap into in different ways. It's really a robust time for climate action in our state and also in our county. So there are groups like New York Renews, environmental advocates, Indivisibles are a really good way to get involved. And so there are a lot of good ways to tap in, but as someone who is an activist and an organizer, the most powerful thing you can do is when you and your friend, all you need is one other person. Don't even need one other person, but one other person's good. You know, can start talking about that. There's no reason you can't have your own EJ subcommittee for this group or another, and just start talking to your, really, I'm an organizer. I really believe the power comes from educating each other and tapping into broader groups. But, you know, and part of, it's a whole nother discussion. There's a lot to say about environmental justice, the values of environmental justice and what it means. You can be an environmental advocate in whichever way that you choose. Environmental justice is about local organizing. It's about prioritizing and empowering the voices of those who are most impacted, and not being afraid to use the big R in racism word when you do that. And really the most important thing that an advocate can do is figure out how, if you're interested in being involved in environmental justice, is figuring out how can you support the development of the folks who are most impacted, who are trying to speak for themselves. And that's a whole nother presentation on its own.
So that's
one person from the group, Catherine Showalter, pointed out, we can find out how our candidates stand and vote for candidates that affect climate change.
Yep, and ask them, and you know what, because look, this is repair, right?
You might want to repeat that in case I, so.
Okay, so there was a question / not, or affirmation that, hey, suggestion, ask it when we do our candidate forums, ask them about climate and the environment and what are they doing, and hold your own local electeds accountable. That is absolutely true and absolutely the case. And what I'll also say is that one of the issues in the environmental movement more broadly has been a history of racism and elitism. Down to John Muir and the Sierra Club, and if you Google it, it's actually well documented. But what it means is that the legacy of that, and these legacies are unfortunate, is that we have a movement that's segregated, increasingly segregated, also can be segregated by age. You have, it's not as intergenerational as it could be. You have a lot of older people who identify or who are called white, who are especially in sort of area, wealthier counties like ours. And so why do I mention that? I lost my thread a little bit. Oh, so so you'll see a lot of talk about, and good talk about, if you ask your electives, do they care about climate change? I doubt you're going to find many who say, I don't care, it's not a priority, I don't believe in it. You're not going to get those folks. You're going to get folks saying, it's great, I support the Bond Act, I support all of these things, I support the CLCPA, and that is fantastic, and we want that. And you can raise these issues of environmental justice too. Those are the ones that they may not, those questions they may not have gotten, do, and in some place, where it's appropriate, have you, where are you? Do you understand the CLCPA? Do you understand the 40%, the disadvantaged communities? Do you understand what that means for our towns and urban areas in particular? What are you doing to make sure, this is my big thing, what are you doing to make sure that the community gets a voice in how these funds are spent? And that you can do no matter whether or not you have a disadvantaged community in your area or not. Come together to demand climate action that benefits you and raise in having a voice in doing that. Have resolutions at your city council saying we need to have public participation. We need to have participatory budgeting, you know, pass local laws that do this, because then you also help the broader movement because you give us precedent. That's what, if you ask me, that is what we really need right now.
Very, very interesting and helpful. Yeah, come up, Gwen, to the microphone.
I was just reading about the environmental leaders of color in Mount Vernon, and it's not,
That's
right
it.
there. I was just reading about the environmental leaders of color in Mount Vernon, and they just finished their program this year. And I'm wondering, you know, tying into you speaking of young activists, and you know, how young people of color getting involved in Westchester and the area?
No, that's a great question. ELC, that's Marvin Church. Who's, you know, does a lot of great work in our area. I know he's got his summer youth workshops. And that's why, again, when you truly, how I feel, when you think about climate, you have to look in the mirror and see a hero. You really do. Like, we are at this, in this decisive decade, the work that, like, when I was standing there with the activists in 2019, I had no idea if that law was going to pass. I probably figured that it wouldn't. You know, like, you know, would you have found out that I would go from being literally boots? I was wearing my boots on the ground. It was Uggs, I think. You know, on the ground, to being named to our Climate Action Council and actually helping write our state scoping plan? Absolutely not. You know, this is a transformative moment for activists of all kinds to be making a difference, sometimes heralded, sometimes not. And so that's why I mentioned, you know, Paul Presendu very well. Paul is one of our local transformational figures. We all know Paul, Marvin, myself, like be in community, you know, with each other on this stuff and support. That's the thing. One of the issues in terms of the inequity in the environmental movement, if that's fair to say, is funding. So, you know, Jeff Bezos gave $1 billion, he's giving more. He gave 100 million to the Environmental Defense Fund and 100 million to the NRDC, both great groups I used to work for, and much less to environmental justice organizations. And that plays out where, you know, and that's played out throughout the country. So the folks who have the money to advocate are not the EJ folks, you know, including myself. I'm looking, although, and there's a lot more opportunity out there now. But be thinking about that, because being able to get money to organize and do advocacy is about giving a voice to a vision. And so we want to have people like Paul, you know, people like, you know, to be able to be, do it, you know, being able to really do the work. And that's, you know, so that's my answer to that.
And come up. And Jackie Holmes, by the way, was instrumental in
Yes.
arranging for Raya to be with us this evening.
yeah.
So we owe you a big vote of thanks for
No,
that.
thank you
for that
so
too,
much.
Raya.
Thank you so much and thank you, Carl and Repair, for having this important talk this evening, and Raya for coming right back from Honolulu, from Hawaii, to be here with us tonight. This is really important because I've only recently become aware that living in Westchester, it's a great lifestyle. We have a great affluent county in a general kind of way, but everybody in Westchester doesn't live the same. I am so amazed at what I'm learning as I work with environmental justice communities. The air quality in Mount Vernon literally increases the asthma rates for the children and the people of Mount Vernon, and the heart attack rates and the disease rates by, you know, multiple percentages, 10% and 20%. I never realized that when we put something in the trash and it's burnt in the incinerator in Buchanan, the people of Peekskill suffer horrible lung diseases and cancers and heart problems from the fact that the incinerators in their backyard. How did that happen? Well, that happened because Peekskill was a disadvantaged community with a lot of problems economically that at a weak moment in their history accepted, okay, you can put the incinerator in our backyard. Would Irvington have done that? No, no. Briarcliff? No.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the wheelbarrow.
So,
It's
so
one of
could
the-
you talk a bit about the terrain of Westchester County and the disparity of life experience and how that happened historically?
Well, that's a big question. That's a big question, but very, very worth delving into.
Give us the Reader's Digest.
I'll give you the
version.
extreme, the crib version for our exam. That won't be happening. So I'm very glad that you brought up the wheelbarrow. It is one of the, if Cancer Alley is sort of Louisiana's poster child for environmental justice, I think the wheelbarrow is Westchester's, or the wheelbarrow. It's this, it's not Peekskill area facility that incinerator that she is discussing. That's the sort of poster environmental injustice, like poster child.
And is that where trash from the whole county goes? I don't really know about this. Can you give us a little sort of detail?
She really kind of gave the.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe I can just because this issue of trash is like historically a big one for me. That when you throw something away in Westchester, it is not landfilled. People think it's landfilled. It's not. It used to be landfilled, but then the landfill got so toxic and so big that they decided, oh, we can't do this anymore. That's in Croton Point. It's capped over with soil, and now it's a wildflower cap over a toxic mess that leaks into the river.
One thing we can do.
Yeah, thank you, Janice. So, but when we throw stuff away now, it goes to the incinerator. It's burnt. So if you put a piece of, a plastic cup or something in the trash, that's burnt. And they try to scrub the air, the effluent, right? But how good can you actually scrub it out, right? That's the problem and it lands on the people in Peekskill and Buchanan. And that happened, as I said, because aren't they like 65%, people of color?
It's definitely
or whatever. Yeah. And historically their economics in Peekskill led them to, as I said, I was reading the story of it. They kind of went like, we don't want to do this, but okay, we'll take the incinerator because we really are having economic problems in our town.
So does this mean that the long-term goal has to be to close that facility?
So.
And if so, then what would we replace it with? What's an alternative way of dealing with the waste?
Reduce.
A little food scraps thing, and I'm sure each community has their own, but in Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow, you can get these little bins at the library. And I noticed once I started using it that I cut my garbage by at least a third. Okay. I mean, that's a lot.
So yes, that makes sense, and I think we all should do that. It still leaves the other 2/3. What is there? Can it be a plan be devised for some long-term solution that can really make a huge dent in the problem, not just a partial dent? I'm just asking.
Well, no, I think and it sounds like you may know about something or you wanted to add on.
I just want to, we have to make a distinction, a very clear distinction here between a robust response and a resilient response. You referenced resilience. There is a distinction to be made between a robust response and a resilient response. We need to be clear when this money comes down the pike that which bucket are we honestly and realistically putting the money into? Because for disadvantaged communities, we're looking at climate resilience, but in some of the places where we live, we may be asked to develop a more robust response so that we don't overburden and continue to burden communities of color with our waste and so on and so forth. So that's a philosophical, but it's also a very practical distinction that has to be made. So when I recycle, it's not resilience, it's just my own little robust way of dealing with some of the waste that comes out of my household, but it's not a resilient response. And that's something that needs to be understood.
So the answer, so yes, the issues are so deeply interlinked, and the what we do impacts the earth, it impacts the natural world, it impacts other people, and yes.
You're not an engineer, so I can't turn to you for the engineering
Well,
solution.
right, I don't have the engineering solution. However, there are advocates and folks who are focused on the wheelbrader, and who are focused on, and that's the thing. At our county level, these are the questions, that we need to be bringing to our officials. There are a lot of plans that are sitting on the shelves that have been unfunded. There are advocates who are focused very specifically on that issue. And yes, there are folks in the state focused on.
The Westchester Alliance for Sustainable Solutions is working to help people around the county figure out how to reduce waste to the point where we don't need an incinerator anymore. We don't need it. That's their idea. And it's the Westchester Alliance for Sustainable Solutions. Check it out on the web and get involved in helping figure this out. And New York State is trying to develop, expanded producer responsibility.
Yeah.
Right.
Many
That kind of
different-
thing. It's a little tough, but anyway, we really have to move towards reducing what goes into the incinerator if we want to be caring towards those people that are now breathing that air.
That's exactly right. And one of the issues that I have been more like at the state level for the climate action plan, one of the critiques, environmental justice critiques of the plan has been that it doesn't go far enough in the waste part of the plan to focus on reduce, reuse, recycle, because be it food rescue, be it diversion, it actually is one of the main techniques that we have. And you're right about there being more. However, industries that the industries, be it the waste industry, the biogas industry, if it's interested in developing landfills, they're going to push back. And so that's something I've been involved in, is that we don't have a robust enough plan that focuses on reduction and reuse.
I get it. Janice, I understand you said that Ginny Laughlin has
Ginny Laughlin
posted
has
something.
sent a link, and we'll send it to everyone tomorrow, but apparently in reading very quickly the beginning of this article from the Peekskill Herald, that incinerator's permit is up in 29.
It's up for renewal in 29. Okay.
Or the permit ends in 29.
I have a question to the folks who are on Zoom. Were you able to hear what Janice just said? If you were, could you raise your hand and show me? Okay, it looks like you were able to hear, so we don't need to repeat, I think. Okay, thank you. But the link to that article is in the chat, correct?
Yes.
Correct, Janice? Okay.
And we'll send it out tomorrow to anybody in the room, people that couldn't come.
Yes, we will be sending out one of our e-newsletters with links and other resources for more information.
And what's really important, however, and that's in our county, again, because of funding disparity and all kinds of things, when you are, and the advocates are great, but one, in the context of environmental racism and injustice, one has to constantly be thinking and saying, where are the voices of those who are directly impacted? How have we done the organizing and the outreach? And are we talking to the Black population of Peekskill, or, because if you aren't doing that, don't get me wrong, like we need to shut down the wheelbarrow. I feel like that all the advocates know that. Then, and let me, I am an organizer, and I've tried to show the thread how I just truly believe that our own interrelational community building is what causes true transformation. And it's the slower work. It's the impatient work, right? Everyone's like, my congressman can pass a bill, or my state Senate representative, I can call them, they're going to pass a bill. We need to do that. Yes, we need to do a lot of that. But it's hard, right? I mean, I can't begin to tell you, it's hard and messy. Like at New York Renews, we have all kinds of activists, and a lot of times we'll have that intergenerational problem. But what do? How do we start having the conversations and making the connections? And sometimes it goes south, and sometimes it's hard and it's embarrassing, and who knows? Focusing on bringing in young people is so important. They often want to go off and do their own thing. we need to build these relationships and be intergenerational. So that's another reason how, more broadly, if you're thinking about the wheel operator in peak scale, you know, what are we doing to educate, inform? And when I say educate, I don't mean telling people about what they're dealing with. So these are when you start getting into, you know, the challenging parts of organizing, you know, and Paul is somebody who talks very eloquently about this, about how you organize in ways that are culturally appropriate. But this, to me, is really the transformational work, and you should never be forgetting about that. Anytime you're working with an environmental group and they have a bunch of money to do advocacy, it means that 9 times out of 10, that the grassroots environmental justice person does not have that resource and is, you know, someone that could be myself, or someone you know who's doing something completely volunteer. So, you know, anyway, just making some comments there. It's so important. I can't begin to tell you, because I truly believe the real transformational work happens on that interrelational, multi-generational, interracial, you know, unified organizing. And that's how New York Renews managed to make something happen. And it doesn't happen, and that may not happen this legislative session. And then it's hard to be patient, but maybe next, or maybe the one after that.
So it takes patience.
I think so.
Patience and persistence. And you mentioned bringing young people in. I have a feeling there are many times when we older folks, talking about people like myself, actually need to follow our younger people, because I think a lot of them are ahead of us on this issue. And we older folks at times have to swallow our pride and listen to what our younger kids and brothers and sisters have to say. They can be several steps ahead of us.
I'm so glad you said that. That's the key. Gosh, in the movement, there's so much back and forth about like this issue, you know, in terms of, you know, the elders, the gatekeeping, just our intergenerational issues, period, of like, you know, you think you know better, and, you know, I think I know better.
Oh, well, back in the 1960s.
Back when exactly. I can't even begin to tell you how it's very humbling, and it can be uncomfortable to, you know, but also, like, I'll give an example. And this is being recorded.
One more,
It's like a funny thing from New York News. So I'm 50. I'm the policy organizer, and the 2 lead organizers are both, I think, 25 at the time. And, you know, they were like, you know, this is ridiculous. We should only have a 4-day work week. What is this? This is absolutely ridiculous. We're working around the clock. We shouldn't have to work on Fridays. And you know what? We should be able to work remote. This is before the pandemic. And none of this makes any sense. It's completely unjust, and we should be more organized on this. And I'm thinking, don't come to work? Don't come to work on a whole entire day, and don't even come to the office? I'm like, you know, that's not the way I came up. And they were all fired up about it. And I was just like, fight the power, and all together. And I was just like, yeah. And then I was in the back, and they went to the steering committee, because it's run by a steering committee of all the, you know, it's a warrior organized labor type of thing. And we should not. And it only worked for summers, but I'll be darned. But it's important though, because organizing, it's tough, exhausting work. And they had a point. They're like, I'm working around the clock, and this is ridiculous.
And isn't it funny how once COVID came, that the remote work that we were told was impossible suddenly became possible. A lot of times I just shut up. The first instinct is to shut up, because when the young people are talking, because how do you know better if you haven't heard what they had to say in first instance? That's a good thing for us grandparents to remember.
I'm like, okay, here they go. And they got all kinds of things to say. They've brought so much freedom and like fresh air to just, I think, our lives in general with the things that they're coming up with.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So Raya, we could go on and on.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to jump in and say, you know, the point you kind of ended on about the importance of dialogue and of community building, learning from each other and spreading the word. And that's kind of what Repair is all about. Right. What you've come and modeled for us tonight, and the contribution that you've made to all of our knowledge is fantastic. We have a kind of a smallish group here, but everybody should at least give Raya a round of applause. Wow, that really was great. Thank you. You're going to come back another time, maybe?
Sure.
Good, I hope
could.
so.
We've got our scoping plan. I'll send a bunch of links. The New York State
Yeah,
scoping
yeah.
plan. By
That's what we need. We do need that. And let's see. Thanks again to Raya. And also thanks to Anne, who was instrumental in making Raya available to us this evening, to Janice and Gwen, who did so much to help organize and to run this meeting, including bringing the great snacks, and especially to Peter Williams, who is our tech guru here at St. Barnabas, and who, if you can hear me or see me, it is because of Peter. So so blame him for the way I look. But again, Peter, thank you very much. It was really, we couldn't have done this hybrid meeting without you.
And thanks to Carl.
Thank you,
You're welcome. Now I want to, before we have our closing prayer, quickly mention some of our upcoming events. We have some pretty cool things going on at Repair. And there's some other good things that you'll want to know about as well. Our next Repair meeting next month, November 16th, we're going to have a special guest, a woman I've gotten to know over the last couple of years named Erica Smiley, who is an amazing author and labor activist. She's the executive director of a group called Jobs with Justice, which is dedicated to revitalizing the American labor movement, in particular by helping to organize the millions of workers who in this country have never been organized for the most part. Service workers, people in jobs that have traditionally been dominated by people of color and women, such as home health aides, domestic workers, fast food workers, people who in many ways are the backbone of our society. During COVID, we came to think of them as essential workers. And these are people who have gotten the short end of the economic stick. Erica Smiley has devoted her life to helping to organize these folks and find new ways to build a modern labor movement around them, which is a key to reducing economic and social inequality in our country. So Erica Smiley is going to come and be with us on November 16th, and I think that's going to be an awesome gathering. I hope you'll be able to join us for that. Another meeting a little further down the road, but to mark on your calendar, February 15th, we're going to have a visit from Reverend Pamela Cooper White. Many of you may have seen an article she recently wrote in the Episcopal New Yorker, which also relates to this book that she wrote about the psychology of Christian nationalism, which is this movement to redefine the United States as a Christian nation with some pretty draconian and anti-progressive agendas attached to how they define Christianity. Her book is about the kind of thinking that underlies Christian nationalism and how those of us who are concerned about it as a political force in this country and in our church, how we can deal with that, how we can communicate with these folks and find a way to begin to define common ground and perhaps move our country in a better direction. So I think that's going to be a very important, interesting meeting for us as well. A couple of other things, not Repair events that many of you may like to know about. United Thank Offering is a ministry of the Episcopal Church. On November 2nd, they are hosting a webinar called Becoming Beloved Community from an Indigenous Perspective. It's kicking off Indigenous Peoples Month. The web link is here on the screen. You could just look up United Thank Offering and sign up for that webinar. And another event that I think many of you might be interested in is at the Jacob Burns Film Center on November 3rd, they're going to be showing the film Sing, Sing Thanksgiving.
I checked and it was sold out.
Oh, it was sold out.
I looked at it yesterday.
Well, Gwen, thank you for that. Some of you may have heard that she checked and unfortunately it was sold out.
They have a wait line.
I'm not going to go on singing the praises of this apparently amazing movie because, but if they're completely sold out, maybe the Jacob Burns will schedule There's a waiting list. Maybe you can, maybe if you really want to see B.B. King and Joan Baez doing one of the great performances of their life on Thanksgiving at Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, this film is the thing to see. And the director will be there answering questions. So. And he's from Ossining. Okay, thank you. But it is sold out for now. You can get on the waiting list. If you're not already receiving our monthly newsletter, you should be. So please send your information to info@repairrivertowns.org. And with that, Gareth, I invite you to come forward and offer our closing prayer.
I invite you all just to at least take a breath, and as we begin to metabolize all that we've shared this evening, give thanks for Raya's ability to raise our awareness of these issues and of the tender places of the heart and mind and body that need to be repaired, particularly for communities of color, the Black community, and all those folks who are most impacted by the ravages of climate change and racism. We ask, O Lord, that you clean and clear our hearts, that we may see you. You will clean and clear our hearts, O God, that we may truly see ourselves. Clear and clean our hearts, O God, that we may truly honor the sacredness of this fragile earth, our island home. And in every blessed moment shared, that we may seek you, serve you, strengthen you as the living presence in every presence. Clear and clean our hearts, O God, that we may see, that we may know, and that we may embrace those things that you call us to embrace in the name of justice and of love. Come, Spirit of the living God, be with us all, each of us this night, as we continue to reflect on this great gift of life that you have given us. And may we, as people of faith, continue to seek the repairing of this world. In your blessed and beloved name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Gareth. Good night, everybody. See you on November 16th.
Thank you.